All right, so, okay, if you've just joined us, then, welcome. I'm here with Cliff Harvey, and apart from having the esteemed title of being a friend of mine, Cliff is an author, and he's actually a pretty successful human in his own right, in that he's an author, clinician, correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, Cliff, researcher and speaker, and a leader in the field of carb appropriate nutrition. We'll get into what that term means in a little bit. Mind-body healthcare, and as you would say, Cliff, the achievement of success in health and performance. And you've worked with Olympians, high-performing athletes, and this may not mean much to Americans, but the Commonwealth Games, athletes who've participated in the Commonwealth Games, yes?
Yeah, so that would be sort of the equivalent of sort of Pan American Games or any of those sort of big regional international competitions.
Yeah, right. And then you also help people who've dealt with chronic health conditions, and you've had your own journey in that arena to deal with as well. And and on top of all of that, that wasn't enough. You're an entrepreneur. You've had several businesses. You've got your you've got a successful training college. I'll let you say a bit more about yourself, but why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about your journey into health and well-being in this whole field?
Yeah, I mean, you covered off most things. I'll give you the elevator pitch of how I got to this point. Basically, I started in nutrition as a result of rugby, of all things. That's pretty common down here in New Zealand, but probably not so common up there in the States. And it doesn't necessarily gel with what I do nowadays completely, but that's what got me into it. Is I basically spoke to the coaches of our high school first 15, which is the top high school team. They said if you can put on a certain amount of weight, you're capped in the first 15, which down here is a fairly big honor to captain your high school first 15. But if you don't put on the weight, you won't play at all. And so I had actually planned to go on and do landscape architecture at university and design Zen-inspired gardens, and then landscapes and things, and took a different direction. Got really passionate about the human body and how to get stronger and more powerful and put on that size that I needed to. But then obviously over the next few years, I looked outside of that as well. I started working as a sports nutritionist fairly early on. So I went to university straight after high school, studied fitness training and sports nutrition, started working as a sports nutritionist, but then came across some of my own health challenges. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is an intestinal disorder, fairly early on. And I've also battled various mental health challenges through the years from sort of a very young age right up till now, really. And because of that, I looked a little bit more holistically at things, studied to become a naturopath. And then through a winding journey, also did my early postgrad in mind-body healthcare, which sort of played off a few things that I'd done through my early years as well, from meditation and yoga. I started doing meditation and yoga when I was about 3 years old.
3 years old?
Yeah, well, my dad was a marathon runner, and he got into yoga, way back in the early 1980s to get a bit more flexible.
Wow.
And so he would be doing yoga. He obviously realized very quickly that it was more than just flexibility, but he would be doing yoga in the lounge, and I'd see him doing it. So of course you just join in, right? Which is the best way to learn. So I don't claim to know a lot about, I guess, what people might call modern yoga now, but I read the books that were sort of coming into the West from sort of the 60s, 70s, 80s, from a lot of those early guys like Iyengar and, Richard Hiddleman and people like that. So I got into that very early, but that then played into what I was doing in clinical practice. And then I took a little bit of a journey back and did my master's degree in nutrition again, focused on some nerdy stuff, medium chain triglycerides and ketogenesis. And then my doctoral research was in carb tolerance. So basically looking at predictors of what type of diet someone should be on. So that's the sort of the nutshell there, and did a few sporting things along the way.
Well, and just in case anybody who's watching or listening to this was wondering about your credentials, I think you've gone way overboard there. But the thing I'm mostly intimidated by that I didn't know was that what got you started was rugby. And I feel like at this point I have to hand in my New Zealand and man card, because I literally made it through half a game of rugby before I got tackled, like totally pummeled, passed the ball off the ground, which I didn't know at the time. Maybe intellectually I knew was against the rules, but at the time. And so then that was it. I got sent off. It was like they didn't put me on for the second half, and that was the only game of rugby I ever played that wasn't just touch rugby at school. So,
well, I think maybe we have a bit of a split in New Zealand where some people are sort of more rugby and, you know, basketball inclined and stuff like that, and others are a little bit more skateboarding and musically inclined, which I think maybe you fit into.
It's very generous and lovely of you, Cliff. I appreciate it.
Which is probably cooler at the end of the day.
I think so. I mean, not that I did go. Actually, just because before you know, I'm now going to have you fail at your attempt to make me look cool. I actually was more of a rollerblader than a skateboarder.
I tried.
I know you totally tried, but I did go backwards down steps and stuff like that. But anyway, that's another lifetime. So okay, well that is extraordinary. Your sort of track record and your journey is extraordinary. And like you were saying, you've got like quite a holistic view to health and happiness and performance. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, very much so. I realized very early on, I was really involved in performance nutrition. You know, within a year of getting out of my first undergraduate qualification from university, I was working with, you know, members of the New Zealand Rugby League team and Super Rugby players, which for the American audience are professional rugby players at the highest level, and a lot of really top athletes. And I was really involved in initially bodybuilding, but I never competed. And then I got really heavily into boxing initially. I boxed competitively, and then I got into strength training, like weightlifting, and I competed in weightlifting. But I was very focused on performance. And so my nutrition was really focused on that. But I think I had taken an approach that was similar to a lot of people in performance nutrition. I was very focused on fueling and the macros in my diet, you know, how much protein, fat, carbs I was eating. And I maybe wasn't looking at that time at the quality of the food I was eating and maybe some of the more holistic aspects of life, despite the fact that I had grown up, you know, with pretty interesting sort of spiritual and metaphysical basis.
Right.
So when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, it really forced a big reevaluation. And I had a split there. I was thinking, well, I was going to go off and study psychology, but instead I studied naturopathy, and through that got back involved in sort of psychology to some degree through the mind-body medicine route. But that really opened up the doors. And it was an interesting thing because I realized that so much that I had done to keep myself well without realizing it as I grew up was the stuff that was really going to benefit my clients as well, from, you know, taking a quality aspect of food right through to looking at the mind body aspects of health as well. And maybe more than that, you know, the metaphysical and the spiritual aspects of health too. So I've always had that holistic basis to my practice since probably, you know, a few years after getting into practice. So that the late 1990s, early 2000s. And I've always had, though, a strong evidence basis for that. So it's interesting because when I was studying naturopathy, a lot of my colleagues said, oh, well, sure, you're a naturopath, but you're too scientific. And I didn't understand that, because you can't be too scientific, because scientific is not opposed to holism. Holism is our worldview, basically all of these things that can help us to be healthier. And science is the way that we explain the world. So they're not contradictory. Science is a method. And interestingly, as I got more involved in science and became a researcher, I got the same sort of criticism, but from the other side, where people said, oh, well, you're too holistic. And it's kind of thinking, well, what are you talking about? There is no dichotomy there. Holism is a worldview. It's about all of the methods that might help someone to thrive, and science is the way we explain it. So in effect, science helps us as practitioners to be safer and more effective. That's basically what it comes down to.
Wow. You know, so let's just take the case. So, you know, I'm trying to imagine if I came to you and I was, well, let's look at it another way. What are the kinds of, you know, issues that you most find that you end up helping people with at the moment? And I don't know if that's an answerable question, because it's probably quite a spectrum, right? But is there sort of a, you know, the average person that you would deal with, what they're kind of dealing with, and what you find that you're, you know, like a starting place?
Yeah, no, it is a very answerable question because of my research area, but also the fact that I was involved in the low carb area and what I call carb appropriate, because it's not
Mm,
just about low carb, there's a spectrum. Because
mm,
I was involved in that area very early on, we're talking about from the 1990s through, most of the people that come to me are either really interested in that and they want to learn more about it, or maybe they have conditions that are going to be most benefited by that. So I work a lot with people with severe metabolic syndrome, so diabetes, pre-diabetes, a lot of people with neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or brain injuries, because they can be benefited by low carb and keto diets, and also people with cancer. So I work a lot with cancer patients now and have done for quite a few years, and that's
wow.
because there is this interesting area where keto can be really useful for people with cancer, but it's not necessarily so. And that's one of the big challenges right now is a lot of people are just jumping into saying, well, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but some people are saying, well, keto starves cancer.
Mm,
And that's not 100% correct. Like that, there are a lot of fishhooks in there, and you need to be working with people who actually understand the fueling of cancer cells, because it's simply not a matter of, well, put someone on keto and it starves the cancer cells of glucose, because some cancer cells can use ketones very effectively as fuel. So we need to really look deeper than that. And again, work holistically with the patient and figure out what the best diet strategy for them is and for what their metabolic state and condition is.
mm. Okay, so, and you've used this term carb appropriate. So tell us a
Yeah.
bit more about that, because I think that for most people, that would be a new term. I mean, you can kind of imagine what that might mean, but what do you mean by carb appropriate?
Yeah, I coined that term when I was studying, really, the first time around. And the reason was that we were told that carbs were most important in the diet.
Mm,
And so you should start your dietary prescription by giving someone a large amount of carbohydrate. And then it's almost as if you made the fat and protein fit within the rest of what they were eating. And that didn't make a lot of sense to me, because we get essential amino acids from protein. So they're essential, and that means in dietary terms that we need to eat them. We have essential fats coming from fats, and we need to eat those. Carbohydrates are actually non-essential in a dietary sense because we don't need to eat them, but
mm.
they can be very beneficial depending on the person. So I sort of had this thought that this actually got me kicked out of nutrition class at university, having this thought. But I figured, well, why don't we optimize protein first and then provide fat appropriately to the individual, and then whatever's left, because carbohydrates are fuel, comes from carbohydrate. And what that ended up looking like was some people would take in few carbohydrates and some people would take in lots. And so I started to get this idea that it was more about the appropriate level of carbohydrate for the individual, not about this arbitrary idea that came from the food pyramid of eating lots and lots of carbs as the base of our diet. But conversely, some people do thrive on higher carb diets. And so we need to recognize the individuality. So really, when I talk about carb appropriate, it's talking about individuality in diet and what is most appropriate for the individual with respect to how much carbohydrate they eat. But that obviously also affects how much protein and fat as well that they're eating.
Okay. And so how do I determine that? Would I need to consult with you to find that out? Or is there some metric by which I could determine, what's the appropriate level of carbs for me? Just
Well,
imagine someone listening, right?
yeah,
How do I work it out? Tell me, Cliff.
the facetious answer is that they buy the carbohydrate appropriate diet book. But outside of that, it's actually pretty simple. I think that if people base their meals on good protein containing foods and then add lots of vegetables. So I often work with very easy portion sizes for people initially. I will quantify a lot of diets. So I'll give them grams and stuff like that, but not necessarily. What we could work on in the beginning is just a portion sort of idea.
Okay.
So let's say you are basing your meals on 1 to 2 palm sizes of a good quality protein food, and then having 3 fist sizes of vegetables and 1 to 2 thumb sizes of healthy oils like olive oil and things like that. That could provide the basis for a meal. And you might not require anything else, because then you're getting in your good quality amino acids, your protein, your fats, your micronutrients from vegetables, fibers and resistant starches for the gut, all that good stuff. But if you're still hungry, there's no reason why you can't have some additional good quality carbohydrate. And because carbs are predominantly fuel, that's a good way to look at it, because if you're getting in the base stuff and you're still hungry and you're eating natural unprocessed food, your body's probably telling you that you need a bit more fuel. So in other words, what we're doing is we're starting off with the foundation: protein, veggies, some healthy fats, and then seeing how we go. And if we feel that we need a bit more fuel, that's when we can start to add some of those good quality carbohydrate, natural unprocessed carb choices like sweet potatoes and yams and things like that. For some people who tolerate them well, sure, some whole grains, wild rice, things like that is all appropriate as well. But the key underlying it all, of course, is that we want our food to be natural and unrefined mostly. So not being dogmatic about it, but let's say we look at our plate. If 80% of it is natural unprocessed food, we're probably doing pretty well as a starting point.
Okay. So I'm not, a lot of people who are watching will be having, I guess, I'm imagining a lot of the people watching will be eating some amount of meat or protein in their diet. I'm a vegan, I'm a vegetarian, right? So, and there'll be a percentage of people who are listening who are, trying to follow a plant-based diet or go more in that direction. So let's deal with me for a second and say, okay, you're going to start me off on finding my perfect carb appropriate balance, right? I would go for, you say like a fistful of protein. So that could be, would that be bean or
a palm?
A palm. So would I go for something hardcore like just pure tofu or tempeh? Or could I do like something that's just higher protein like beans? What would you recommend for my palm?
Yeah, so when you're vegan or vegetarian, the protein options that limit carbohydrate are a bit more limited in the diet, but that's not a problem. It just means that we need to think slightly differently. So you're 100% correct. You might have tofu or tempeh or one of those very high protein vegan options that's relatively sparse in carbohydrate. And that could, then the meal plan could be exactly the same, or the meal structure, I should say, could be completely the same. But if you were choosing things like beans, I'm a big fan of my vegan clients having sprouted legumes, sprouted lentils, sprouted mung beans. They're pretty high in protein, but they also have some carbohydrate. Now, that's not a problem. But all you need to really think about then is if you're adding, if you're in a meal, you're having the base of your protein coming from beans, you probably wouldn't need to add any additional carbohydrate, or if you do, not much. And that's the only big difference, really. A lot of people, and I was, as you know, I was vegetarian for probably close to a decade or so. It was quite a long time. And I am now omnivorous again, but that's just for my own reasons. But one of the challenges we have is that a lot of times when people are following a plant-based diet, they tend to overload on say grains or potatoes, as the real base of their meal. So let's say, for example, you're having a dal or a vegetable curry.
Right. Which I might be having tonight, actually. I've got to have a bit of dal in the fridge. So that could be, you're right on the money. Yeah, so there I am tonight with my dal.
Dal's a great option, right?
Oh, okay.
Typically what people do is they'll load up their plate with heaps of rice.
Yep.
And they'll put a little bit of dal on top.
Right.
So they're pretty much, their meal is basically rice.
Yes.
What I would suggest is they look more at getting more vegetables into that meal, but also prioritizing the dal. You then want to have a good couple of, fistfuls of dal and then a smaller portion of rice.
Yes.
And that would then just shift that balance a little bit. But I do want to reiterate that if we take a step back, before we get too much into quantification of things, if people are looking at that plate and it's almost entirely natural unprocessed food, they're probably going to be fine. Because when we look at all the research, people argue about, well, this study showed higher carb is better. This study showed lower carb is better. If we actually dig into the observational data and go down the rabbit hole, what we find is that the best outcomes over time come from when people are eating natural foods.
Yes. Yeah.
And what that means as well, I'll just throw something in here.
Yeah.
Often when people are eating more natural foods, they auto-regulate. And what that means is they choose to eat the right amount. typically we choose to overeat without realizing it because we're eating foods that aren't very satiating. They don't satisfy us. And so we don't realize we're doing it, but we keep wanting more and more and more. And that's particularly true with, the sugary and very refined types of foods.
Okay. All right. So I got it. So whole foods, natural foods, right? As much as possible, 80% of the plate. So where does the appropriate part come in? So I start off with my 2 fists of dal or my 1 fist of tofu and, 3 fists of veggies and then maybe 1 fist of rice. And do I monitor that for a week or 2? And if I start ballooning out, then reduce the amount of rice, or is it just kind of play it by ear? And then just, if I'm going to start with the foundation of protein and vegetables and then reduce carbs as necessary until I find my optimal level. Yeah. It's trial and error.
It is to some degree, yeah. And the reason that it works, though, is because when we prioritize protein and veggies, that provides the most satiating base for a diet. So in other words, that's what satisfies us most.
Right.
A lot of people actually end up craving more and more food because they're not getting in enough protein. And so what we often find is, and it sounds a little bit overly simplistic, but it's not, it works in practice. When people prioritize protein and veggies and have, some good level of healthy fats in there, they typically don't feel like having all of the extra stuff as well. They feel more satiated, so they just don't feel like they need as much, say, rice or grain or sweet potatoes added to the meal, because they're already both physically but also biochemically full.
Okay. I'm with you. I'm tracking. All right. And so, okay, well, what about this one? At New Zest, we sell protein powder, and we think it's the best, plant-based, protein available on the market, right? But where does that fit in? So, it's very naturally processed, et cetera, but it's not a whole food. So how does that fit into a diet from your perspective?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because when I say the diet should be based on natural unprocessed foods, I really mean that, specifically it should be based on natural unprocessed foods. And that allows us to have some flexibility, both for, say, treats every now and then, or for using things that are really going to help with our lifestyle for convenience and that will help with our behaviors. Now, there's no real difference between having a protein powder like, Clean Lean Protein or a whole food protein source in terms of the protein that you're getting. They're both going to function just as well. And so from my point of view, the value of protein powder is predominantly twofold. It's convenience, number one, because often it's not convenient at every meal to prepare a meal, number one. So you're better off having sort of a nutrient-dense smoothie based on a protein powder. The other aspect of it is when we track what many of our clients are doing, often they actually do end up slightly under eating protein relatively consistently. And because of that idea of protein leverage that I talked about before, where the body will almost compel you to keep eating until you get enough protein. If we had, say, a protein shake every day, which helped us to get to our desired protein intake, that's going to help everything else flow diet-wise as well. We're probably not going to crave so much. We're probably not going to crave so much sugar. We're probably going to eat a more appropriate amount. The key thing is, though, without realizing that we're eating the appropriate amount. So it's quite a different strategy to, the old Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig's types things. We have to really focus on your portions, right?
Yes.
We don't need to focus on them so much because we're getting in what our body requires, and therefore it doesn't crave more and more food in order to try and get those in. So, I think protein powders are really useful for that. I have a protein shake every morning.
Okay.
I have a protein shake with Clean Lean Protein, and then I have a multi-nutrient type formula with that as well to get in some of the, multi-vitamin, multi-mineral type aspect as well. And then I add some good healthy fats to that. Particularly, I add MCT oil to it and a few other things, and that gives me a really nice, convenient, easy thing I can do every morning, because I don't really want to spend a lot of time mucking around for breakfast. But I am one of those people who benefits from having breakfast. So I wake up, shake it up, knock it back, have my coffee and get into writing, and I'm done.
Okay. All right. Awesome. And actually, I totally forgot to mention this at the beginning. You are involved with New Zest. You're not, whilst you're your own entity and doing a lot of stuff your own, you've actually been part of helping formulate some of the products here. And you were right there at the beginning of the brand. And I think that's important to say, one, because so people can get a sense of the kind of, expertise that's behind the brand, but also for the future, I want to have you back. And, I want people to sort of get to know you a little bit more as well as we get into it. But anything for you to say about that? I didn't really want to talk any more about that today necessarily, like, our products, but I did want to introduce you, and I literally forgot to say that at the beginning of the introduction. So anything for you, your history with New Zest?
It is important because, I always disclose my conflicts of interest. It's something that I have to do as a scientist and researcher, is to say, look, I am involved with this company. I was one of the founding members, and I have been involved in the formulation of the product since the very beginning. One of the reasons, though, was because as a practitioner, it was difficult to always get products that I guess I could trust. And so one of the easiest things to do was actually be involved in the formulation of them, because then at least I know from source to client what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I guess we could talk for hours. This is one of the things I'm excited about, because I feel like we could have taken any one of the things we've spoken about today and just gone on for like an hour on that. I want to give people, I feel like already just that one thing about finding the sort of carb appropriate level for you is just super valuable. Like I'm going to try that today and start doing that myself, because it's so easy. I'm going to start with the protein. In fact, I had a shake yesterday in the afternoon, like you were talking about convenience, and it really did satiate me. Like I was no longer craving going out and grabbing some, chips or whatever. But, that's something I think everybody could easily start implementing if they wanted to, right? Just a handful of protein, 3 handfuls of veggies, and then a little bit of carb, and then see how it goes, right? See how one's hunger goes, see how one's, if one's trying to manage weight management goes, aliveness, alertness, energy levels, all of that kind of stuff. What do you think is the biggest thing that gets in the way for people in terms of achieving their health goals? What do you most find is the obstacle for people?
It's not having a structure that works. It's that simple, I think, because there's a couple of nuances that play into it. People have been told for 30, 40 years now, longer actually, because I've been in practice 20 years and it was going a lot longer than that. But like even maybe 40, 50 years, that we need to eat extremely regularly through the day. So you need to have meal, snack, meal, snack, meal, snack. That's a barrier to people, because when I think about preparing 6 or 7 meals in a day, I'm already feeling anxious, right? It's too difficult. That doesn't work for people functionally. And it also doesn't work for people physically. There's no reason for it. In fact, we probably get better results when we don't snack. Mm-hmm. That's been shown in the research conclusively. So what I mean by that is that people, if they have a clear idea about what their meals are going to look like, and that they only need, let's say, for a lot of people, even 2 meals a day is fine. Or for most people, it's still the standard 3 square. Yeah. If you know what a structure for those meals is, you've got your day structure there, and I'm going to have breakfast, lunch, dinner, and I know what the structure of my meals is going to be, then it makes it very easy in the moment to make sure you're putting the right stuff on your plate. There's one technique that I've found to be incredibly powerful, though, and that is whenever you cook dinner, cook too much and put lunch away for the following day straight away.
Okay. Oh, that's a great tip for people to take away from today. Yeah.
Because what I've found consistently is that most of my clients, not all, but most of them are pretty comfortable once they understand what a meal should look like. They're pretty comfortable preparing dinner.
Yeah.
The meal they most often fall off on is lunch, because they forget to take something, or they forget to prepare something in the morning, and then they're suddenly stuck with convenience options around their workplace or whatever it happens to be. And so if they've already got that there, they've got 2 meals out of their day covered. Now that might be all that they're eating. And if so, that they're done. If not, breakfast I find is actually pretty easy for people as well if they have enough convenient options, which is why, for example, I use a protein smoothie in the morning because it's easy. So, I know that when I wake up in the morning, I've got my shake, breakfast done. I get into my work, I do a whole bunch of writing. Lunchtime comes around, I've got my lunch in the fridge from dinner before.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. And then in the evening, I can make dinner, or my partner can make dinner. We'll share that responsibility, and we're good to go.
I think that's great because look, one of the biggest. I mean, I'm lucky because I've discovered Uber Eats and Caviar, and I found a great a salad joint that delivers every lunch. But that's not cheap, number one. And I much prefer to have a home cooked meal, even though this is really good stuff. And I think that's one of the biggest obstacles is everybody knows that preparing your own food, you know what it's going to be. There's no hidden nasties, and you know that you're going to make something good for yourself if that's your objective. But it's sometimes half an hour, 3/4 of an hour prep time if you include cooking it, washing up, just gathering ingredients. Oh gosh, I forgot that. I better go to the store. All of that. So if one can do one kind of like cook fest a day, that sets us up to win, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, I am a big fan as well for a lot of people, especially starting out, of eating relatively similar foods each day.
Yeah.
And I know that stands in contrast to the variety idea that we have in nutrition, but we need to train behaviors before we train for variety. And so when we're eating fairly similar things each and every day and getting into the habits, the power of habit, basically, we're getting into the habits of better eating, then it becomes easy. At that point, we start to experiment anyway, because it's like, oh, well, I haven't tried, I don't know, endive before. I'm going to try that as a vegetable instead of arugula,
Yes.
We start to experiment naturally because we've already got the structure and we've trained our behaviors. And that's what it comes down to. That's why people fail, I think, is because they don't think about training behaviors. They think about following a diet.
Yeah.
And then when the piece of paper's not in front of them, or the app fails, or they just slip up for whatever reason, it's broken, and they say, oh, well, it's done.
Exactly. Or they get to the end of the 3 months. This is when I say they, I mean, we get to the end of the 3 months and I'm like, oh, enough counting calories already, or enough having to eat this, and this already. I just want to get back into freedom, But if I've trained a habit, and I always thought it was 21 days for a habit, but I see the latest research says 66. So,
It varies. It varies depending on the habit.
On us, eh?
It depends. It's a good point, because it depends based on the individual, because there's a pretty big variability there. Yeah. The habit, the type of habit, and the resistance to change for that habit for the individual. So it could be anywhere between 3 weeks and 6 weeks or something like that. But I personally find that when people, I quite often get people, that don't break the chain mentality. Do it every day and mark it on your calendar with a big cross for 30 days straight. And typically that's pretty effective for people.
Okay.
Don't break the chain for 30 days and you'll generally keep on doing it pretty consistently.
Chain will keep going. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, I think that's like a number of good takeaways. I know for me today, the portions, making the 2 meals at once in the evening and working out my carb appropriate level, that's awesome. And, again, we could keep talking, but I've taken more than enough of your time today. So before we go, if people want to find you, follow you, find out more about you and some of the books you've written, Cliff, and, services you provide, where's the best place to go?
The best place for all of that, because it spins out to anything I've done basically, is just my website at cliffharvey.com.
Okay, cliffharvey.com, and whichever platform we're publishing this on, so Facebook or YouTube, we'll put the link to that down in the description field. But cliffharvey.com, pretty easy to remember, so just go there, I guess.
Sounds good.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was super fun.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again soon.
We will. All right. Well, goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, Cliff.
Awesome, buddy. Thanks, Johnny.
Okay, ciao. Okay, how do I stop this? That's the question. And stop live stream. There we go. And stop recording. There we